Prior to the 2023 season for the New York Giants, a lot of people came into this season with high expectations for this team. Last year, they finished the season 9-8, and nobody expected that. They expect that team to be a bottom 5 team, and somehow they made the playoffs, knocked out the Minnesota Vikings in the first round before losing to the Philadelphia Eagles in the second round. Despite this, the Giants made a few upgrades, and like I said, they had a lot of high expectations. They added Darren Waller, Jalen Hyatt, Deontay Banks to this team, and a lot of people thought this team was going to be substantially even better than they were last year. We are currently at week 6, and the New York Giants are currently sitting at 1-4, way below expectations, and a way worse team than they were last year by any means. By any means, it's an absolute dumpster fire. Some of you guys watching this video may be asking, what the hell happened to the Giants? They looked so good last year, despite the fact that they had one of the worst rosters in the NFL on paper. However, you look at them now, they have a way better roster. They have pretty much upgraded at every position possible, and they still look like one of the worst teams in the NFL. How was that possible? How did they look better from last year with a better team? There are a lot of factors into why this team has looked as bad as they have earlier on this season, and I'm going to get into it in this video. So without further ado, if you haven't yet, go ahead and like the video, comment, subscribe. It's your boy Philly, and I do football videos every single week. I also do basketball videos. I also do New York Giants videos almost every single week. I do previews. I do the rundown like I always do every single week at the end of the Sunday. So if you want to see any of that, subscribe to my channel, tap the bell icon, follow me on my social medias. I will leave that down below in the description, and let's get into it. So as I said before, there are a lot of factors into why the New York Giants have started off the season so horribly, but I'm going to get into the main problem with this team, and it's been the same problem for the last 5 years for this team. The offensive line. The same offensive line. Well, not the same offensive line, obviously, but with the same players, obviously. But basically the same factor into why Eli Manning's career was shortened with this team. This offensive line, or coaches, GMs, have simply not been able to develop a good offensive line with this team. It's almost like it's a curse at this point that this team cannot have a good offensive line. The team's offensive line hasn't even been bad. It's been historically horrific. They're one of the worst offensive lines, and I think in PFF history. Like I said, it's one of the worst offensive lines I've seen in football history. It's one of the worst offensive lines I've seen in New York Giants history. By a long shot, probably. Maybe I have been long line enough to see any other offensive line, but as far as I'm concerned, it's the worst offensive line I've ever seen in NFL history for the New York Giants. And you look at the players for this offensive line, you look at them. Andrew Thomas, all-pro left tackle, quite possibly the biggest bright spot on this offensive line. Ben Bredeson, at best, is a serviceable guard. He's not great, he's not good, he's just serviceable. John Michael Schmitz, he's a rookie. He has time to prove himself. It's going to be a work in progress. Mark Lewinsky, Joshua Zudu. Mark Lewinsky's horrible. I'm just going to keep it a book. He's also pretty bad. Joshua Zudu hasn't really gotten a lot of time to prove himself. At this point, he's still a project in my opinion. Then you go to the 6th overall pick in Evan Neal, who's quite possibly played like one of the worst offensive tackles in the NFL. I've seen so many people blame Joe Schoen for this. Listen, Evan Neal was a consensus top 10 pick by pretty much every mock draft. Every GM had him going top 10 in the draft. So you really can't blame Joe Schoen for picking a guy who was consensus top 10. You can't blame him for that. I could see if it was a guy who was projected to go maybe later on in the first round, or maybe even early later on in the second round. But you can't blame him for picking a guy who is pretty much a top 10 prospect by pretty much every analyst, expert there is. The fact that it hasn't worked out is something that's more of a player problem and more of a coaching problem to this point. And we really don't know who the problem is for Evan Neal. Is it really a player problem? Is Evan Neal not learning anything that the coaches are telling him? Is it really a coaching problem? Is Bobby Johnson, who I never really thought was an outstanding offensive line head coach in the first place, really the problem? And does he really need to kick rocks for this team in order for this offensive line to finally get better? The fact that Bobby Johnson even has a job to this point right now is absolutely outrageous, because this New York Giants offensive line line, like I said, has not just been bad. It's just been historically bad, historically horrific, one of the worst nightmares of an offensive line I've ever seen. So the fact that Bobby Johnson to this point still as a head coach is absolutely mind-boggling. Any other coach, any other staff member would have been fired to this point, but somehow Bobby Johnson still has managed to keep a job to this point. It's true, like somebody said, no quarterback is really going to be able to function with this offensive line. Boy, the offensive line has been absolutely horrific. Daniel Jones, the $40 million quarterback, has not made life better for himself as well. If you look at all 22 film, Daniel Jones has missed a lot of throws. He is making a lot of overthrows, not making the correct reads, staring down his receivers. Basically, rookie mistakes that you see from a rookie in their first year that Daniel Jones is still doing in his year 5 season. So while the offensive line is understandably horrible, and that's a huge factor into why he's probably playing bad, Daniel Jones is not making life any better for himself when you do rookie things that a rookie should be doing. It's called rookie mistakes for a reason. Only rookies should be doing this. A guy who's playing in his year 5 should not be doing things like this instead of improved on it to this point. Once again, this is not something you can blame Joe Schoen for. Yes, you can say Joe Schoen massively overpaid for Daniel Jones, but you can't sit here and say that he didn't have to pay him. The New York Giants were in a situation where he had no other choice. It was either pay Daniel Jones, give him his money, or you either have no quarterback. You stick with Tyrod Taylor, or you maybe find a guy like Baker Mayfield, Mitch Trubisky, Jimmy Garoppolo, who, let's be honest, are not substantially better than Daniel Jones in any way, shape, or form. They might be slight upgrades. They might be slight downgrades even. But in no way were they going to help this team any better than Daniel Jones did last year. And I was one of those guys for the most part who said Daniel Jones paid $40 million was something I was not rocking with. If you watched my video from a couple months ago, I pretty much said that Daniel Jones does not deserve $40 million. While he had a good season, it was not no $40 million like it's good. It was just good enough to the point where, he took care of the ball. He managed the game right. He kept us in games, but it was never $40 million good, and I never thought he deserved any of that money he got, in my opinion. The New York Giants are going to unfortunately be in a huge hole when it comes to the 2024 NFL Draft, and if they're picking top 5. Do you finally move on from Daniel Jones? Do you give Brian Daboll a chance to finally get his quarterback of his own choosing? Because we all know Daniel Jones, it wasn't Brian Daboll's choice. It wasn't even Joe Schoen's choice. However, like I said, both of them were in a position where you had no other choice with the QB position. They brought in Tyrod Taylor, obviously, as a bridge QB, because we all know Tyrod Taylor could easily take Daniel Jones' spot at any point, at least then we thought. So, yeah, like I said, the QB choice was never any of these guys' fault. They just pretty much had to rock with Daniel Jones because they had no choice. So while, like I said before, the offensive line is historically horrific, I don't think Daniel Jones is making his life any better. But as like I said before, a lot of the things that the New York Giants problems had were limited in mass last year because of Brian Daboll and his work. I think most people will admit that Saquon Barkley is the best offensive player we have on this team to this point. Without him, the Giants probably do not make the playoffs, as he was a part of a huge success for the New York Giants because of his rushing game. The New York Giants had one of the best rushing attacks in the NFL, led by Saquon Barkley, which is why he was a Pro Bowl last year for a reason. The thing that the Giants did that made the Giants so good last year was the fact that they didn't ask Daniel Jones to do a lot with his team. They were not asking him to pass the ball 20, 30 times in a game mostly. They rolled on Saquon Barkley and then rolled on Daniel Jones and his rushing ability in a lot of these games. Them obviously being able to balance it out, having a balanced attack with running and passing, and obviously being a run-heavy team mostly. Yes, they were able to have success, and Daniel Jones is not being able to be aggressive downfield, passing the ball a lot because that rushing heavy team was in effect. But with Saquon Barkley being out, they're asking Daniel Jones to be a quarterback. They're asking him to pass the ball more. They're asking him to do things that he was not asked to do last year. And now that he's doing all that, he is struggling. He is not confident. He is under pressure. He is panicking. He's doing things that, like I said, he wasn't doing last year because for the most part, he wasn't asked to do a lot of things he was doing last year. So he's struggling and he's confused basically. And that is something that's pretty alarming when you ask me. And to the people that constantly diss Saquon Barkley and disrespect him, this will teach us a lesson that Saquon Barkley is still, regardless, the best player on this team. Because without Saquon Barkley, this rushing attack has been awful. Daniel Jones has been awful. This passing attack has not really get anything done. And Saquon Barkley was a huge part in both of the reasons why we had success last year. Because the rushing game was helping us balance it out. And without him, this team is pretty much lost on offense. And as you guys remember, the Giants basically did not want to pay Saquon Barkley last year because he thought playing a running back would be an overpay. I was one of those guys, and now I regret that because Saquon Barkley should have gotten paid. He should have gotten the money he deserved because he's truly the motor of this offense, and he is basically this team if you really think about it. We didn't pay him. He's hurt. There's just so many wrong things that the Giants could have did this season that they unfortunately didn't do. And there's some things that they should have done, didn't do, and they unfortunately did do it. While this offense is in an absolute mess, it's not that the defense has been any better whatsoever, as they have had a few key players who have been struggling to this point. Xavier McKinney has been a shell of a player he once was. He had an outstanding year in 2020 despite the fact that the Giants were horrible. However, he has regressed, and with a guy who's trying to look for a new contract, this is not the way you earn it. He has not earned it. And constantly dissing the New York Giants fans in the media, basically dissing other people, is also not helping this matter whatsoever. So Xavier McKinney right now, his chance to get a second contract with his team, not looking too good. Adoree Jackson's also in the last year of his contract, has also regressed tremendously. However, with the emergence of Deonte Banks, Cordell Flott, and maybe in the future Trey Hawkins, Adoree Jackson will be asked to do less on this team in the future. And as the future rolls on, you will see Deonte Banks, Cordell Flott, and Trey Hawkins a lot more on this team. In a way, this also makes Adoree Jackson really tradable if the Giants really want to lean towards the future for this team. Although Kayvon Thibodeaux has 4 sacks on the season after starting the season with 0, he still has a long way to go and improvement can be done. He has a really low PFF pass rushing grade and a run defense grade, so obviously there's a lot that needs to be done with Kayvon Thibodeaux and their work needs to be done there. However, when Azeez Ojulari is also playing, Kayvon Thibodeaux is playing some of his best ball because that's one of the best edge duos or one of the more underrated edge duos in the NFL. And teams are going to have to worry about 2 guys trying to run at them even more. However, with Kayvon Thibodeaux not having Azeez Ojulari in some of these games, he was almost a ghost because teams were not having to scheme and plan for 2 deadly edge rushers. They were only having to plan for Kayvon Thibodeaux. They game planned around it and executed on it. To this point, Bobby Okereke, Dexter Lawrence obviously, and maybe even Leonard Williams and maybe Deonte Banks are the few bright spots we have on this team when it comes to the defense side of the ball. Everyone else has either just not been that good, not have done anything special, they're just not making a huge impact on this defense whatsoever, other than those guys I probably just named. And while I love Brian Daboll, I don't think he's come to a point where he needs to be fired, but he's not been the perfect head coach this year. He's regressed on a lot of things. I think keeping Bobby Johnson is one thing I will continuously disagree with until he's fired. He's done nothing, nothing yet whatsoever positive for this offensive line. Nothing. I also don't like the fact that he's kept Daniel Jones out there multiple times in blowout games, and he's continuously gotten sacked, making life for Daniel Jones even worse. So those are 2 things I massively disagree with Brian Daboll has done this season to this point. Honestly, I have to believe that John Mara is also a huge issue in why this team is bad either. He has done a lot of things to this team over the past couple years that is one of the main reasons why it's been so bad. Keeping Dave Gettleman for all those years and we're still not fully recovered from him is one of those things that made this team bad. Hiring Joe Judge or being a part of the hiring process for Joe Judge was another thing that he's done. John Mara has not done a thing for this team in a positive way whatsoever. Steve Tisch, I know you're the only one on this team who has balls. I know you're the only one in that ownership who has balls. You need to step in and you need to tell John Mara to get his head out of his... This is a question I really have to ask. Why did the starters play more in the preseason? I think the Giants, out of all 3 games they had in the preseason, I think the starters played 1 game and I think 1 drive. Daniel Jones played 1 drive. That's about it. So the fact that they didn't play more than that is absolutely concerning to me. And I think that's another reason why this team has struggled. Had they had these issues down pat earlier on and they caught on to it in the preseason, maybe this team would be somewhat better. I'm not saying they would be significantly better. I'm not saying they would go out there and defeat the Cowboys and the 49ers, but I think this team would be in a significantly better place had those issues been caught on too early in the preseason. In reality, like I said, everybody is to blame. The offensive line, the QB, the defense, coaching, ownership. Everybody on this team right now and everybody around it has an equal issue into why this team is as bad as it is at this point. There's no other way around it. There's no sugarcoating. Everybody is a problem. To this point, I would not be surprised if Saquon Barkley himself decides, I'm not suiting up, I'm not playing by that offensive line, I'm not playing with this horrible team, I'm done. You can either trade me or just sit out until you give me a new contract. I would not be surprised if Saquon Barkley was to do something like that at this point in the season. Do not risk an injury, do not risk lowering your value in your contract, or none of that. I would not be surprised if he does this at this point. Got a question, how does this team blitz the most out of any team in the NFL, and you have this amount of sacks to this point? I don't understand. I really don't. How? That's another red flag for this team. Defense has been a huge issue. I thought I showed up against the Miami Dolphins. They give up 500 yards. It's absolutely terrible. In conclusion, like I said, everybody is an issue with this team. The quarterback, O-line, everybody is an issue whether they want to admit it or not. So there's no, if you had a better O-line, no, it doesn't matter. He's an issue whether you like it or not. The offensive line is an issue. Everybody's an issue. Nobody's perfect. Nobody is free from, criticism. The New York Giants need to figure out what's wrong, and they need to figure out what's wrong quick. Right now, they're heading for a top 5, top 10 draft pick. They need to figure out what's going to happen and how they're going to fix things. And they have a long way to go if they don't fix it, and they don't fix it right now. And I'm finally going to wrap the video up here. Make sure if you haven't yet, subscribe to my channel, tap the bell icon, follow me on my social medias down below in the description, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all that will be down below in the description. And without further ado, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, like I said, like, subscribe, comment, tap the bell icon, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace out. Pray for the Big Blue.
Mask gon' fuck it, 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 mask got 50 likes in Randolph, tryna blast off, he wasn't in the face. In my way, for a nigga better go pray. I'ma send kill where you stay. Walking down a little nigga, a minor with a micro Drake. The drop we score, nigga, no one play.